Welcome, Sandra. Thank you so much for joining us on the Beyond Barriers podcast. We are thrilled to have you here. Tell us a little bit about yourself, your story, and your journey. What makes Sandra Sandra?
Hi, thank you so much for having me, Monica. It's great to be here. And I think that's just a very complicated question because, from my perspective, it's multidimensional
Mhm.
because there's many phases of your life. And I think from the point of view that I was, first generation American in the United States, learning how to apply for college, what career do I want, that was a particular phase, and growing up with my parents that are 100% Mexican that had no idea how to traverse that landscape and figuring it out on my own. And
Mhm.
then you go into the first part of in terms of entering corporate America. And many of us that are first generation, we're kind of independent and we're going to make it happen. And you're realizing that, no pun intended, like you bump into barriers, and
Yes.
how do you overcome those barriers? And then you go into the next phase of your career in terms of middle management. And oftentimes as females, and female leadership, there is the leaky pipeline in terms of the phase of you having a child, and can you be
Yes.
an outstanding partner, an outstanding mother, and then be an outstanding employee. And many of us have really high standards, and then you're kind of challenged by this position of like, well, I'm honestly doing shitty in all of them, right? Because
Right.
you only have limited time, and there's no playbook of how to be a parent. There's no playbook in terms of how to be a working parent. And then you kind of begin to figure out, what does a working parent mean, and then you transition into the next stage of your life should you want to continue up the corporate ranks. And there's few of us females and few of us in
Right.
terms of minority backgrounds. And then you are, the minorities, we're competing for the next position. And then you realize that some of the people that you think would have your back, whether the other female leaders or the other Mexican Americans,
Mhm.
actually don't have your back because
Mm.
they are competing for the next level of position. And so how do you traverse that? And so what I would say to you and to anybody is that, like, life is like ways, directionally where you want to go, but allow yourself to explore like the unexplored neighborhoods that you never knew existed.
Right.
um, you're going to have all these experiences that are going to change who you are.
Mhm.
And so what I would say, it's hard to answer that question because there's so much complexity in life, and all these amazing experiences, whether for good or for bad, that help inform who you're going to be. And
Mhm.
you're always becoming. I think Michelle Obama's book of Becoming is like, you're always becoming until
Mhm.
that final last breath that you take. And so I think it's, go with the flow.
Mhm.
Let experiences help inform who you want to become. And sometimes in the way, you're going to surprise what you are also capable of yourself that you never realized that you were capable of.
That's fantastic. And it's so insightful because there is that complexity of the just the intersectionality of, being a woman, being Latina, being first generation, like all of these different things that are compounding in some cases. And thinking a little bit about then how do you build your personal brand from that? Like, how do you tell your story? And how do you stand up and stand out, right? And how do you distinguish yourself? And given, your unique expertise too, and building brands and that, what would you say, how do you apply it to yourself? Like in your career, how have you done that in terms of really looking at yourself and being able to tell your story?
Right. So, ironically, I would argue the first half of my career was not about building my brand, but it was like being like everybody else. And that's really
Mm,
like society wants you to put you in a box and
right.
define you. And so, because you're a woman, you must be X. Because you're Mexican American, you may have an accent. Like, there's so many things that society tries to define you.
Mm,
And for the first part of my career, for better or for worse, like being Mexican American and having to go visit my family in Mexico like every summer, and then literally being raised in an upper middle class Caucasian neighborhood, I knew how to be a chameleon. Like I knew how to fit in and adjust to the norms that were being created for me.
Yes.
And over time, I like to highlight this story because it was when I joined Intel in 2006.
Mm-hmm.
This gentleman by Ernie Felix put time on my calendar to talk about the Intel Latino Leadership Council.
Mm-hmm.
And it was for leaders that happened to be of Latinx descent.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, okay, I'll take this meeting and recognize that for the many parts of my life, I didn't highlight that I was Mexican
Mm.
because I was judged with regards to, oh, you got into college because of affirmative action, not because of your own intellect. Or society would just assume many things about my family, my dad's career. So I would hide my ethnicity.
Mm.
And many people, I mean, I could pass for Caucasian, Italian, Mexican, just
Yeah.
because of my, how I look. And so I hid my ethnicity. And when Ernie Felix asked me this question in the conversation, he said, well, Sandra, like, what challenges have you had being a Latina in corporate America? And I'm like, Ernie, like, what are you talking about? Like, I've never made my gender ethnicity an issue. And
Mm-hmm.
so, no, it has never challenged me or kept me from being where I am today. Arguably, that question like sat in my subconscious for several months.
Mm-hmm.
And one morning I woke up and I realized that I wasn't embracing who I was. I wasn't embracing my ethnicity. I wasn't embracing my gender. I wasn't embracing what I was meant to do in this world. And I
Mm.
went through a very dark journey with an executive coach, therapy to really understand Sandra Lopez, and to your point, like my brand and what I
Mm-hmm.
represent. And through that journey, I knew that I like to create things. I'm a builder. That means I'm new in your career in terms of creating new markets, and you see that manifest. I love helping the next generation to build themselves up.
Mm-hmm.
And so you start to really hone in on your differentiator and what you can bring in service to companies,
Mm-hmm.
what you can bring in service to society. And I always go back to the point that we are all uniquely different, nature versus nurture, and tap into who you were meant to become and
Mm.
lean into that because everyone else is taken. And so I think for your listeners it is a journey. And oftentimes we don't want to put a mirror in front of ourselves
Mm-hmm.
because it can take you to very dark moments or your upbringing. But I would argue that that question that Ernie Felix gave me that day in that moment has been one of the greatest gifts of my life because
Mm-hmm.
that put me in this trajectory. This is probably why I'm sitting here now talking to you because of that self-reflection.
Mm. That is so fascinating. And thank you for sharing that. I mean, it was so vulnerable, but I think many of us who do have that intersectionality of being Latina, being female, you do learn to be very fluid and chameleon like, that you lose yourself sometimes.
Right.
And
100%
you
agree.
don't, and then you realize later as we get older that actually those are the differentiators, because you are a minority sometimes in a very white male dominated organization, that is actually a strength. And how can you leverage that and kind of use that um, to propel your success? So I think that's fabulous that you shared that story. Now, you talked a little bit about, sometimes these social norms or limiting beliefs or, overcoming fears that, well, I don't know how to do this because I'm first generation, or what do I do? What are some techniques, or what were some of the hacks that you used to help yourself get over some of these limiting beliefs, and push forward and become the successful leader that you've become?
Yeah. So, I think, hacks really apply to everybody in a very individualistic way. But I remember one of my mentors, and he's a male, and
Hmm.
he's still a mentor of mine in the business community world. He gave me a couple of things. He's like, Sandra, if you just ask the question or ask for help, the worst thing you're going to get is a no. And
Mm.
it's not going to affect your health. It's not going to affect your career, but just ask. And however, as a Latina, that was very difficult when I was asking questions or challenging authority, because as Latinos, the whole concept of respeto Like
Yes.
you don't challenge authority. So what I did, unbeknownst to me, was like doing a life hack is that I would practice when I knew there was a big meeting and there was senior level executives. I was being well versed on the topic.
Uh-huh.
I would write down my question. I would practice my question literally the night before, and then I would look for moments that there was pause, or they where they would say, "Hey, does anybody have a question?" And I said, "Yes, I do have a question." And I would just wait for that moment to get asked that
Uh-huh.
question. And then over time, I would wait for pauses, and I would say, "Listen, I have a question." And I would phrase it in a way that I was still respecting the
Mm.
senior leadership. And then over time, I'm not hesitant to ask any questions anytime now, but it took a very long time. And that goes back to like how you were raised. And I always think about like, learn about the person's background and how they were raised, because there will be limitations. And for me, the whole respeto, and what I learned was such a great value of respecting the elders in the household,
Mm-hmm.
was counter and hurt me in my career. And
Yeah.
so figuring out those little baby steps. And oftentimes I think when we talk about things that we are fearful,
Mm-hmm.
often are trying to take a big giant leap. And what I have learned is you're better off doing the baby steps. And so,
Mm-hmm.
somebody said, 1% better every day. And imagine 365 days from now, how much better you're going to be. And that goes
Yes.
back to the principles of know what you're afraid of and just break it down into baby steps.
Mm-hmm.
And that will help you overcome kind of the fear or anxiety that you're experiencing.
Mm. I love that you touched a little bit about the cultural norms and those, the way that we were brought up from a cultural perspective of like respeto. And the other is, around self promotion, around mija, just do good work, put your head down, work really hard, and you're going to get noticed. But you and I
Yeah,
both know, and we probably learned really quickly that in the corporate environment, you're going to get passed up if that's what you do. So
correct.
tell me, how did you get past the uncomfortableness of self promotion? What are some of the things that you do to make sure that you are getting acknowledgement for the work and the achievements that you do?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I learned very quickly. One of the things that I always do and I do to date is I look at other people that I admire from a leadership standpoint,
Hmm.
and what do they do right and what do they do wrong, and the feedback that they garner. So whether it's people that I know or people that I don't know, one of the things to your point is really grounding themselves on the impact that they're having on business and or
Hmm.
society. And so that isn't necessarily like bragging about, look at me, Sandra Lopez, I was covered in XYZ magazine. It was
Uh-huh.
really about, I think it's called the humble brag
Mm.
of you have to, and I always tell everybody, regardless of who you are, ethnicity or gender, is have your brag sheet, but
Mm.
translate it to the impact that you're having on the business or on society. And so, and reminding your management. So always ask for the one-to-one professional development conversations and say, let me
Mm.
show you what I've been able to accomplish to
Mhm.
date. It's also equally important leveraging LinkedIn, because you want to create value for yourself. I always tell people you are your own CEO. So
Mm.
as we try to drive market cap value up for companies, why would you not want to do that for yourself? So you look for opportunities on LinkedIn that you're making a difference either in the market that you're serving or social justice causes, and it's grounded on something that is you've executed a program. So I
Mhm.
think there is a difference between PR for PR's sake versus the humble brag of the work that you're doing
Mhm.
is driving tangible impact to society or the business community. And I always tell people, do that exercise. Don't wait till the end of the year, like, oh, what did I accomplish the past 365 days? Like every 3 months, create your brag sheet,
Mhm.
make it on business impact or societal impact, and share it with others. And then doors will open up because they'll know what you're capable of.
Mm.
And so I think it's something that one should not be ashamed of, and should actively pursue.
Thank you for sharing that. And I think the other beautiful thing about your brag sheet is that that also is the evidence that you need to kind of reflect and look at yourself and
Right.
propel yourself forward when you have those moments of imposter syndrome or doubt or whatever, to be able to go back to your brag sheet and say, look at this, like, I did this, like, I'm amazing. I think that's fantastic. And I think our all of our listeners should start, polishing up this brag sheet of theirs and use it for those two reasons, right? To be able to
Exactly.
self promote. And
Well, and
also,
I think to your point, Monica, too, like females, as females, like we are not told by society to self promote, right? We don't take the next job because we think that we're not capable of it, while our male counterparts are like, sure, I'll raise my hand even if they're not even qualified. So I
Mhm.
do think the brag sheet also helps drive confidence in your capabilities, so you can
Mm.
turn no on to an on. Yes, I can make it happen.
Yes, that's fantastic. Now, you've told us and shared with us a lot about your mentors and sponsors, and many have been male. And one of the things I want to touch on is that we coach a lot of women. We help a lot of women in terms of accelerating their success. And they're always asking about, there aren't enough female mentors or female leaders, people that look like me. And I'll be the first to admit myself that a lot of my mentors and sponsors were male. And so tell me a little bit about how you accessed influential leaders and how you went about leveraging community to help you get ahead.
Great question. I think I want to first start off in terms of the difference between mentor and sponsor. And a
Hmm.
very simplistic point, I tell people mentors are your advisors and
Hmm.
sponsors will be your advocates to get to the next level.
Hmm.
So let's break that down. Mentors, like I started the podcast, like there's so many different phases in your life.
Hmm.
You can have a mentor in terms of, wow, I just had a kid. How do you do this work life balance? And there's a mentor for that.
Hmm.
There are mentors in terms of, I want to ask for the promotion, yet I'm afraid.
Right.
And so I think mentors should be used based on the opportunity that you're trying to address.
Mm.
Now, from a gender perspective, let's realize that there's going to be many more men than females. So just don't make it a gender issue when it comes to mentorship.
Hmm.
Really focus on what do you need help on and go find the best mentor. Now, how do you do that? Usually within your company, you can start with your boss, like, hey, I'm looking for XYZ. You can start with your colleagues and say,
Hmm.
do you know anybody that could help me in this particular situation? And or I always tell people, like, what my boss said is, like, the worst thing is you can ask, you can go to LinkedIn and see who's covering that particular topic and send them a message. They're either going to respond or they're not going to respond. Like for me, ironically, I tend to respond to various individuals, specifically the next generation, because I wish somebody could help me when I was in their shoes.
Right.
On the sponsorship side, I've happened to have both female and male. And I would not be where I am today if it was not for my sponsor, specifically Chris Min at Intel, who took me through a
Mhm.
multi-year journey in terms of what does it take to be an executive at Intel, and really putting I was very self-reflective and knew what the responsibility and accountability is. So one thing for everybody to realize is as you move up the ranks, you
Mhm.
have greater accountability more than just your job. And so
Right.
understanding that and really preparing me for that. Yet, look, I will take any male that wants to be my sponsor because ultimately they have the Rolodex and they have access to all the C-level, all
Yes.
the board of directors. And so I would argue take anybody that is willing to be your advocate,
Mhm.
agnostic of gender, and know that when it comes to maybe having a male sponsor, you probably have to make slight adjustments given the Me Too,
Yes.
the recent Me Too. So maybe it's going to be, lunch, not in person, or maybe over Zoom. So just know that there's some adjustments that need to be made because of the Me Too
Mhm.
movement. However, it should never preclude you from proactively securing a sponsor. And I would just say, when it comes to sponsors and mentors, just try not to make gender an issue. It's really about the best person that's going to help you remove a particular barrier
Right.
and or open the doors for you.
That is so profound. And I'm so glad that you also brought up sometimes there is that male sponsor who may be apprehensive because of Me Too and things going
Yeah,
on in society and in the world. But you can be creative, like you said, of making it to where both of you are comfortable and it's like, just an open lunch or like a virtual meeting or something where it just makes the safe space for both parties. I think that's so important. And the other is that, like you said, sometimes the male sponsors do have much more access, and leveraging them for their access is vital for your success. And we shouldn't be ashamed of leveraging your resources and maximizing your resources, because the men do it. That's what the good old boy network is,
exactly.
right? They help each other out. So why not take the offer when they say, "Hey, I want to advocate for you," then just say yes. Like, don't be afraid to do that. I think that's fantastic. Now, share a little bit about, because you have been successful and you've taken big risks, you've even changed lanes, right? In terms of where you were going, and then you went to Intel and doing different things. How did you make those decisions? How do you kind of take those risky decisions and make those decisions? What do you do? Is there a process you go through?
There isn't a process, and I will tell you, it's going back to the earlier conversation around really trying to understand you
Mm,
and really becoming the best version of yourself. And sometimes the greatest growth is when you're the most uncomfortable. So I want to highlight a particular moment in my career that many people would think would have been the wrong decision, but arguably it was an amazing decision.
uh-huh.
Is when I came back after giving birth to my amazing, who's now 10-year-old daughter. I was given the opportunity to either, maintain the consumer brand or pursue this effort called new business.
Hmm.
And honestly, Monica, it was so vague. I'm like, what is this new business? What is
Hmm.
Intel doing? Yet I knew that I was a builder. I cannot be in positions that is about the stagnant quo, like it's being stagnant, or
Uh-huh.
just keep the status quo moving forward. So I took the risk of moving towards this new position, which meant having zero team members.
Right.
So it went from like a large organization to a team of one.
Uh-huh.
That in many businesses would be viewed as a demotion. But
Mm,
for me was an opportunity to grow and learn and be part of the company's transformation, even
mm,
if I was a team of one. And that led me towards a career pivot, moving into away from the world of marketing. And I had this aspiration to be a CMO, but it's because I didn't even know what maybe being a general manager would be.
mhm.
And I didn't realize that maybe I had the capability of, managing a P&L and L and doing business development. So that career pivot allowed me to enter into the business unit world, which is much closer to a P&L and driving revenue for the business,
Mm,
which is much closer to having direct relationships with customers.
right.
And I love being in those roles. I thrive in being in that type of position. And now, I lead a team, I create new markets, I can, like, I feel like I'm always part of history. And so I use that as an example that sometimes you're going to be at a crossroads and you're going to have to make a decision. And society will tell you, Sandra, stay with large budgets, a large team, that equals success. And
Right.
I defied that norm and I went with what was in my heart.
Mhm.
And I think because of that, my career trajectory just took off. And I have met so many amazing people. And I know, like, I go back, I'm like, because I made that decision, that gave me the opportunity to go speak at Davos.
Mm,
Because I made that decision, I now can flex muscles that I didn't even realize I had.
mm,
And so I think the biggest thing that I think everybody should think about, and I mention this frequently, is that society is going to force you to make decisions that you think is the right thing to do. And I challenge everybody is do the right thing for you as long in the process as it's kind.
mhm.
Um, and you are going to be a happier person. And so um, I think we all have inflection points, and I think it's just a lot of self-reflection, self-awareness, and buck the norms.
That is so inspiring. And so, you took a chance, you
Yep.
took this role that was blank slate, right? You had this
Right.
whole, and you have this pioneering kind of drive and mindset, right? Like blank slate, I can do these things. Now, I'm sure there may have been some setbacks and failures along the way because when you don't know, it's just like there's the unknown. How do you overcome those setbacks and failures, when you did come across them?
There's this book called The Growth Mindset, and failure is learning. You
Yes.
know, and I think this goes back to why have we made failure bad? Like,
Mhm.
why have we defined failure as equivalent of not succeeding? When there have been so many examples of entrepreneurs that have now created multi-billion-dollar businesses, they have failed multiple times and have succeeded. So I think we need to reframe the word failure, and failure equals growth,
Mhm.
that enables you to do better. And so I embrace failure. It took me a while to learn about that.
Right.
But for me, we have many failures. And as long as you don't repeat the same failure twice, because that means you didn't learn from it. So I would
Right.
say, don't be afraid to take a step forward because you think you're going to fail. You're at that point, you're already sabotaging yourself. Do
Mhm.
not do that. Take the step forward knowing that you're going to make it. And
Mm.
in the process, you may have setbacks, but those setbacks were only intended for you to learn, because that experience is going to help you with the next barrier that you may confront moving forward.
Yes. So I love that tool of reframing and flipping failure on its head and causing it to be kind of a teachable moment and
Right.
learning from it. That's fantastic. Now, thinking about successful habits of successful leaders, you in your own right are an extremely successful leader. Tell us a little bit about maybe some habits or rituals that Sandra does in order to make sure that she is successful throughout her day.
This may be like overexposing, but I will be transparent. COVID has done a number on me.
Mhm.
For somebody that traveled greater than 80% of her, career life,
Mhm.
always on the go, my job is interacting with human beings. For that to be all taken away from you,
Mhm.
and um, you know, figuring out how do you survive,
Yes.
and more than anything, it's your mental health. And so when COVID began, the first 3 months was like, I got this. Of course, to your point, like I'm a survivor. And then during the summer of last year, I definitely began to take a toll. And I started to explore. I meditate. I always meditate. I do transcendental meditation,
Mhm.
because of the stressful job that I have. But then I went further into really understanding your body, your mental health. And
Mhm.
so I have, I call it there's a book called The Miracle Morning. I took parts of it, but I also applied it for myself. There's nothing like starting your day off right.
Mhm.
And so I walk, and it's about creating boundaries. My
Mhm.
morning is untouchable, usually before 7:30. I rarely will take a meeting, just so I can do my routine, whether it's the exercise, gratitude, journaling,
Mhm.
reading more about self growth than about what's happening in the stock market,
Mhm.
and giving me that time for me, and
Mm.
making sure that, I was talking to a really good friend of mine, and I was telling him, we don't spend a lot of time self loving ourselves. What a concept.
Right.
But if you don't love yourself and you can't show up, um, the best person that you could possibly be, then you're going to struggle. Your productivity will be impacted, both on your personal and professional life. You will not feel rewarded. So for
Right.
me, what I do is I put myself first, so
Mhm.
then I can show up for everybody else, and so I can show up for my company as well. And so I would say, every because we're all different, everybody's life hack is different.
Right.
Go on your own journey. I like to run. I never was a runner, but with COVID, I became a runner, and
Mhm.
one of my employees said, well, I'm not a runner. I go, then don't run, but go find something that's gonna give you adrenaline and make you feel better about yourself, and go
Right.
try different things and figure out what hack is the best one for you. Um, so I do think the importance of boundaries and really protecting those boundaries. And it's okay to tell your boss, no, I can't take that meeting unless it's urgent, because I need to focus on me.
Mm.
And your management should know that and respect that, because they would want the best productivity out of you. And if it means that you need to take that, from 12 to 1 completely off for lunch or to go run, then embrace that and have the conversation with your management.
That is so empowering. And it's, sometimes we hear people and we say, set your boundaries, do your boundaries. But I think you gave a really tangible example, and giving people permission and saying it's okay to tell your boss no, unless it's urgent,
Right.
because this is like, I can't move it. So
Yeah.
I think putting yourself first is so important. And thank you for sharing that, because it is empowering to hear, oh, this is how I handle it. It's the
Yeah.
unmovable meeting. Like, sorry, I can't move it. It's a critical meeting unless it's
Okay.
urgent.
It 100%, Monica. No, everybody, I find when I mentor the next generation, females have the harder time of establishing their boundaries, because we recognize, and we all recognize, that we have to work harder. But
Right.
working harder does not mean that you cannot protect your boundaries.
Hmm.
And I will challenge any manager or leader today, in today's world, that your EQ has to over index your IQ right now, with all that's happening with COVID, social justice. We have a new leader that has joined Intel recently. His name is Saf.
Hmm.
He leads the organization that I'm in. And, you know, I am so grateful for him, because he started his quarterly business meeting this week with mental health.
Mm.
And I'm
That's
like, he
phenomenal.
gets it.
Yeah.
And he told his employees, take care of you, get that 8 hours sleep. And so I will challenge, anybody that has a manager that's not thinking about EQ, have that conversation. Maybe you can help the other person grow.
Hmm.
There's a lot of articles out there about the next generation leader, and
Hmm.
how the next generation leader has to have EQ greater than IQ.
Yes.
They may benefit from that article.
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. And I know that our listeners are going to be just wanting more of, the wisdom that you've been sharing, Sandra. So before we wrap up, I love to ask all of our guests, what are some parting advice that you would give our women to share with them, of how do they continue to accelerate their success in this day and age, and even in this current environment?
Yeah. I'm going to reference an image that I recently saw from one of the news journal articles. It was a woman in a closet,
Hmm.
uh, on her computer, taking care of a kid. And interesting enough, I'm prepping for another presentation that I have, and I Googled working woman during COVID,
Uh-huh.
and it was interesting the pictures that came up, and working man during COVID. That was very
Mm.
interesting. The
Yes.
disparity of the woman had all the kids, the man just looked like he was working and nothing really has changed. And I think it's about time that we ask for help. I think
Mm.
it's about time that our partners, whether it's family members, etc.,
Mhm.
to take off the load, because the middle management they are leaving. Females are having to choose to leave their career over the male. And I
Mhm.
don't think you have to choose. I think it's about asking for help, and how do you get creative to manage everything.
Mm.
I am very fortunate, because the father of my daughter has shown up, and he picks up greater than 50% probably of the workload. And so for that, I'm forever grateful. But in the process, what it told me is I asked for help, and he
Mm.
kindly stepped up. And I do think that we cannot afford females to leave the
Mhm.
workforce. Then we will be talking about this 100 years from now.
Right.
And so everything we possibly can do to support you to stay in your job is the conversation that we need to have.
Mhm.
So we have new leadership in DC. party agnostic? Are there policies in place that we need to put in place to make sure that we support females? If
Mhm.
so, what are those nonprofit organizations that we should be engaging with, or creating our own nonprofit
Right.
to drive these policies forward? So, but that image, when I did that Google search, I got I got goosebumps,
Yes.
because this is going to become a systemic problem, and I do not think we're talking enough about it. And
Mm.
so, in any way that I could possibly be of help, I'm here to help. I think there are some resources. You challenge your company to provide programs in place for working parents.
Yep.
I know Intel employees do that, and Intel graciously responds, appropriately. Um, have those conversations within your company, outside of your company, and in your household. There's no excuse for a woman to take on more of the burden. And then, speaking of Latinas, we are kind of the, matriarch, and there's something around the mother that
Yes.
we then get. It's further punctuated
Yes.
about our role and the expectation that our parents and abuelitas and abuelitos have of us. So,
Yes.
um, I think there's an education process to be had, and we need all the help that we can get, so the leaky pipeline no longer exists.
Wow, that is absolutely just phenomenal. Thank you for pointing that out and bringing the awareness, because it is so important and it needs to be a conversation that is being had every day more and more, so that we can continue to accelerate and see more women in leadership. So, again, thank you so much for your time. And I know that our audience is going to want to know how to hear more from Sandra. How can they follow you, keep in touch with you? What's the best way for them to reach you?
I'm on LinkedIn. You can, follow me LinkedIn. You can message me. I know my admin partner always gets frustrated, but look, I do have monthly mentor days. I do that because I know, Monica, you and I talked before. I never had, when I started my career, mentors and sponsors were very few and far between. And
Yes.
I know in my first part of my career, if I had access to them, I maybe would have made different career choices. And
Mhm.
so now, and you mentioned, like, you know, beyond barriers is to accelerate careers. I'm
Yes.
here to help accelerate somebody's career, and so they don't go through the challenges that maybe you and I had to endure, and they could avoid those pitfalls.
Fantastic. Well, again, thank you so much for your time. And I know that your pearls of wisdom are going to reach many, many individuals and inspire them and empower them. So, again, thank you so much.
No, thank you for having me, and thank you for Beyond Barriers. I think it's a great program, and thank you for all the work that you've been doing.
Thank you.